Hi guys, it's Fred here, and in today's video I'm going to show you how you can fix your patella tendon pain. What is patella tendinopathy? So more than likely, if you've got patella tendon pain, which is at the bottom, it's a focal point of pain, so that means just a really small point of pain at the bottom of the patella, so around here. And all that tendinopathy means is that you're getting pain from overuse of this tendon. So as the stress on the tendon increases, so does the pain. So more than likely, recently or potentially over a longer period of time, you've had massive jumps in training volume, or you've had some increase in an activity which uses the knee or puts a lot of stress on the patella. So again, this will present with very focal point of pain, just at the bottom of the kneecap on your patella. As you do more, the pain will increase. Another thing to note, warm-up effect. So once you've warmed up and you progressively do like quite an effective warm-up routine where you're just gradually building things up, this can reduce the pain quite significantly. Another big kind of telltale sign of patella tendinopathy is a next day pain response. So if you do something again where you're loading the knee or loading the patella a lot, you'll get quite an aggravated response the next day, so you'll get more pain. And then you can also get quite a lot of pain where you're in a prolonged sitting position, where you're bending the knees in a bent position, and therefore you're compressing the patella tendon quite significantly. Okay, so again, tendinopathy, this word tendinopathy just refers to pain being caused by overload of a tendon, and in this case, the patella tendon on the knee. Okay, so moving on, who gets it? So I've broken this down into two categories, athletes and lifters. So typically athletes who get patella tendinopathy are people who do a lot of jumping and landing. So this could be basketball players, it could be rugby players, it could be football players, because of the jumping, landing, accelerating, decelerating, changing direction. So basically any field sport, football, rugby, hockey, netball, anything like that, it's very common to see people with these issues. So again, when you're going through this presentation, take into account what sport you're doing and think, am I kind of more likely to get it? With lifters, it's either people who do deep squats or explosive squats. So in the case of a lot of people that I work with, so crossfitters, weightlifters and powerlifters, a lot of them do both of these things. And the reason this is causing a patella tendon pain or patella tendinopathy, whatever you want to call it, it's compressing the patella at the bottom of that squat. So when you're in that deep squat position, again, you're compressing it, which is causing pain. So how do they get it? So overload of the tendon, which is what I've mentioned, but what is that? So either it's just tensile load, which is essentially just the amount of load you're putting through it. That's all that means. Or compressive load, which is what I just talked about when you're sitting at the bottom of the squat and it's compressing the patella tendon. So that's load in that compressed position. Tendons have viscoelastic properties. All that means is they respond to load in essentially these two ways. So again, overall load and load in compressed positions. That's literally all that means, okay? And when do they get it? So changes in load. And this can be down to the sport. So again, with sport, it's very common to see patella tendinopathies at a particular point in the season. If you play a field sport, or even if you're into CrossFit, weightlifting, anything like that, if you have particular peaks and troughs in your training cycles, when you have particular periods of high intensity, you're definitely more likely to develop tendon issues, and especially patella tendinopathy. If you've had like a big squat cycle of back squats, or you're clean and jerking a lot, and you're doing that relatively heavy, that can definitely make you more prone to developing a patella tendon issue, tendinopathy. Surface, so again, this is more in relation to field sports, so rugby, football, or basketball, something like that. If you had a change in surface, obviously that's then affecting the impact and the load on the patella tendon, or an unrelated injury that might be keeping you non-weight bearing and not loading the patella tendon. So for example, at the moment, I'm currently recovering from an Achilles rupture, and I've got my left leg in cast, so I'm not loading it at all. So when I can start to load it again, more than likely, I'm probably going to get a flare-up of a patella tendon pain. not tendinopathy, but it'd definitely be harder to manage because essentially this left patella tendon hasn't been loaded for 6 weeks, and it's not going to be loaded really for another 5 to 6 weeks. So I need to build things up very, very gradually. So again, unrelated injury that keeps you off your feet could be causing that as well. So bear that in mind. So structure and function of a tendinopathy. This diagram looks really complicated, but it's not. I want you to focus on this middle section, which is pain. So if we look at this overall, we've got poor function, which is this box. We've got pain, and then we've got pathology. Okay, and all pathology is injury. So down here, poor function, unloaded tendon with low capacity. So that's probably not you. You're going to be in this box here. So you've got pain, and it's affecting your ability to do particular activities. And typically, if you got an image done of your patella tendon, you will see that the tendon is degenerative and it looks different to your other knee. Okay, and then down here is where essentially this is what happened to my Achilles with any tendon. So degenerative, non-painful tendon with good function can rupture. So essentially the tendons, if you don't do anything, it'll go through this stage, go all the way down to here, and then the tendon will get so weak that it can potentially rupture. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but that's what can happen. But you want to focus on this middle bit. So generally most people are in this stage where they're getting pain from it, okay? Function. So you know, again, that you've got patella tendinopathy if it doesn't work like a tendon. So slow movements are usually okay. I will caveat that with, so I've got an example here of a weightlifter squatting. Depending on how fast you're squatting can really impact the pain, and that's a really telltale sign that it's a patella tendon issue, because generally fast movements really aggravate it, and aggravate it a lot more. So anything like jumping, bounding, plyometrics, running, anything like that, okay? So typically people fall into these two types of tendinopathies, either reactive or degenerative. So a reactive tendinopathy is acute and it requires some settling. And all that means is not complete rest, but just decreasing your training volume and going through this exercise process that we'll show you in a minute. But we have this, again, complex looking diagram, which isn't too complex. So if you look at this part here, we've got the normal tendon and excessive load plus individual factors. So essentially, if you load the tendon too quickly, you go into a reactive tendinopathy, which is you get pain when you do those activities, okay? And then to get back to a normal tendon, we need to appropriate modification of load. So essentially that's the settling. It's not complete rest, but it's just decreasing training volume slightly, which will get us back to a normal tendon. If we leave it and we just let the excessive load continue, so you just continue to train, ignore the pain, your tendon can go again into this stage, which I mentioned previously, but goes into a degenerative tendinopathy, which can be quite serious if you leave it for a long period of time, okay? Then we also have a degenerative tendinopathy, which I just touched upon. So this is typically chronic, so you've been dealing with this for more than a few weeks. That's kind of typically the difference between acute and chronic. Chronic is probably like a few months to a year, is what I would say. And this requires a significant amount of loading. So the acute, you might be able to get away with just knocking back your training volume and it might go away. But if you've been dealing with this tendon issue for over a period of a few weeks, a few months to a year, it definitely requires this exercise process that we're going to go through. Whereas reactive, you might just be able to get away with not completely resting it, but just knocking back volume slightly, okay? So the first thing, most important thing, is listen to the pain. So pain during training is okay, as long as you don't go over a 3 out of 10 pain score. So if you imagine a pain score, 0 is no pain, 10 is max pain and manageable. Just don't go above that 3 out of 10. So a little bit of pain is okay. What isn't okay is an increased next day pain response. So if you do that particular activity, all the exercises we're going to go over, and you overcook it, you overdo it, and you get a next day pain response, that is not okay. So a good way to test this, I use this with a lot of people, is a pain provocation test to essentially test if you've done the rehab correctly, if you've done too much volume, and and if you're in that sweet spot where, again, it's not above that 3 out of 10 and it's not aggravated. So you want to go into this cold. So you'll do your rehab on day 1, and then the next day you're going to do this pain provocation test, which is a single leg squat on an incline board, and all you're going to go to is this degree of knee bend. So you can see he's down to about 90 degrees nearly. So just so he's going to tap his heel on the floor. You're going to do this cold, so no warm up. And I just want you to do 1 rep on each side. And then I want you to note down what pain score you got. So again, if it's aggravated, it's above that 3 out of 10, it's increased from the previous day, then you want to knock down the rehab volume or the training volume, okay? And you ideally want to do this pain provocation test at the same time every day. So again, day 1, the very start of rehab, you don't need to do it, but then from day 2, you would do it every day at the same time. And then you want to track the pain score on this provocation test. And ideally what we want to see over time is that's gradually decreasing as you go through rehab, okay? So there's 4 things we want to address when we're trying to fix our patella tendinopathy. Number 1 is the brain. So more than likely, the brain is actually causing an overactivity of the quadriceps on that side because of the tendon injury. So more than likely, on your injured side, whichever that is, your quads are actually overfiring. So it's a weird type of inhibition where the brain's like, we actually need to get the quads working harder because there's an injury at the tendon. So what we actually want to do is down-regulate that a little bit and get the quads to fire, but we don't want to get them to overfire. So we want to get to work well with all the other muscle groups in that leg. Muscle bulk or muscle, you typically, if you've been dealing with a patella tendinopathy for a long period of time, so again, over a period of a few weeks, you'll see a massive difference, significant difference side to side in terms of muscle bulk. So you'll have generally smaller quads, smaller hamstrings, smaller calf on the injured side compared to the non-injured. So that's something else, again, we want to improve and get as close to the uninjured side as we can. The tendon properties, so again, we want to improve the properties of the tendon and take it from a degenerative or a reactive tendinopathy back to a healthy tendon. And then the kinetic chain, that's how the body's moving as a whole. So we'll talk about this towards the back end of rehab. But essentially, we want to move in the most effective way possible. And this is more a case of biomechanics, so moving well in whatever sport you're doing. But it's also a case of, it links back to this brain idea that we don't just want the quads or the patella tendon to be taking all the load. We want to be moving efficiently. We want to be spreading out the load to the parts of the body that are actually designed to do that. Okay? So it's a 4-stage process. I'm going to run through it now. Stage 1, isometrics. So isometrics are really, really important to start off with. And I've got 4 great examples of some exercises. You want to do these daily until your pain is regularly 3 out of 10 on the pain score or less than that. And again, 10 is max pain, 0 is no pain, okay? So we want to do that until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less and functional deficits are improved. So brain function, muscle bulk, tendon health, and kinetic chain. That's just my battery, I'll get rid of that. So that's what we want to do in stage 1. So 4 really good examples here of some exercises you can do. So number 1 is this high wall sit. So you can see here, if your patella tendon it's very, very, it gets very, very aggravated by basically nothing, I would start off with a high wall sit. So you're not at 90 degrees, you're above 90 degrees. And if you can, I would do a single leg on this. So I take 1 leg off, okay? And then I would do both sides. Another good option you can do is the split stance hold. So this is very, very simple. And I really like this as well because depending on how irritable your tendon is, you can adjust the height and the height and the depth of the split stance. So you can see here, I'm kind of in a mid stance, but again, if the patella tendon is really, really painful, just start higher up and have less of a knee bend. And then as you get more comfortable, get this back leg deeper and have more of a knee bend on the front leg, because again, that will be loading the patella tendon more and more. Okay. Then we have a hamstring bridge. So single leg hamstring bridge, really, really important to build up all the muscles on the back side of the body as well. So this will be hamstring and calf. And then this exercise here is a calf bridge. So you can see here, hips are literally like an inch off the floor. He's on a single leg and he's just got his heel, again, a millimetre off the floor. This will toast all your calf muscles, and it's a really nice way to get the calf muscles working. And again, it's sending a signal to the brain that we want to load this tissue and reduce the quads firing quite as hard. Okay, in terms of sets and reps, again, I would do these daily, and if we were going to do these 4 exercises in a sequence, I would start off with the single leg high wall sit, and I would do 3 sets of 45 to 60 seconds. Then I would go into the hamstring bridge, 3 sets of the same, 45 to 60 seconds. Then I would go into the calf one, 3 sets of, you won't be able to do 45 seconds, but let's say 30 to 40 seconds if possible on the single leg. If not, start with a double leg. So just bring that leg down. And then on this split stance hold, I would do that last, and I would just do like 1 to 2 sets to failure on that. And I would do that every day, again, until you meet these criteria and until you're using that pain provocation test every day, and until you get these scores. So again, until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less and functional deficits are improved. Okay. Then we go on to stage 2, which is lifting. Now, what you're going to do here is you're going to do lifting on day 1, and then you're going to do the isometrics on day 2. So the isometrics already talked about, you're going to do that, and you're going to alternate it with some lifting. So in stage 2, essentially we want to get the knee bending and we want to get everything moving. So stage 1 is like pain reduction, get the brain working. Stage 2 is really moving everything. Okay, so some good exercises for stage 2. Here you've got me doing a front foot elevated lunge, goblet squat, really, really nice. And these are both really good with a tempo element as well. So like a 5-second eccentric, 5 seconds going down or 3 seconds going down, which will really help put some more load through the tendon. And then you've also got a hinge variation. So here I've got a staggered stance RDL, but you could do a normal deadlift, you could do a hip thrust, something to get the hamstrings and the posterior chain working, but not just a hold like a hamstring bridge, actually actively going through full range of motion with hip extension. Okay, and then criteria here is exactly the same. So you want to go through this stage until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less and functional deficits are improved. Most people, they go through stage 1 really well, but then they rush through stage 2. So most people, you'll spend most of your time in stage 2 if you're rehabbing your patella tendon, okay? And again, it really depends on the person, but for some people, you could be in this stage for several months. Yeah, this isn't a case usually of a few weeks. It's usually like a long-term thing, especially if you've been dealing with a patella tendon issue for years and years and years. You've got to think about that. You've been dealing with it for years and you're expecting something to be fixed in a few weeks. It's not going to happen, and your brain and your muscles they need a long, long time to build up your muscle bulk, for your brain function to improve, everything to improve, because again, your brain and your body is so used to being injured in that area. Okay. Then we have stage 3, which is store and release. So I like to do this in a 3-day sequence. So day 1 is your store and release day. Day 2 is the lifting, which we talked about previously. And then day 3 is the isometric sequence. So on this, the store and release method is completely based on your sport. So if your sport requires a lot of jumping and change direction, that's what you need to do. If your sport doesn't require a lot of jumping and change direction, you don't necessarily need to do as much of it, okay? So all store and release is some introduction of some jumping and some plyometrics. And again, this is very specific to your sport. I would typically start with a higher volume, lower intensity approach. And then as you go through rehab, I would decrease the volume and increase the intensity. For example, I have some good examples of some exercises here. I'll just move myself out of the way. So like a double leg pogo jump, we have a skater bound, and we have, this isn't a plyometric, but it is kind of a change of direction as such. It's like a lunge with a chop. Now, if I was going to program, let's say, some double leg pogos to start off with, I would go really, really high volume. So I'd go like 4 to 5 sets of 30 to 60 seconds, if you could manage that within that 3 out of 10 pain. It's not aggravating it. And then as you go through rehab, let's say you're wanting to get back to football, at the very back end of that, it would be a few sets of some really high intensity sprints. But you want to start off with like some really low load plyometrics, really low load jumping, high volume, and then decrease the volume and increase the intensity as you go through this stage. So again, you do that on day 1. You potentially go through like 2 or 3 different exercises. high volume. Then you go to your lifting day. And the one thing I didn't mention on the lifting day, in terms of sets and reps, this is fairly self-explanatory here, like typical programming. So like 3 to 4 sets of anywhere from, I go 8 to 15 reps on each of these. It doesn't have to be anything complex, okay? With these, I would go high volume. So I would go, you could go three to 4 sets on each, and as high volume as you can tolerate is what I would say initially. And again, you want to go through this stage until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less, and functional deficits are improved again, okay? So, then we have the final phase, which is return to sport. So, all this is just gradually returning to the sport you're doing until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less. So, for example, if you're returning to football or rugby, this might be a case that you slowly integrate back into some training. Initially, that might just be one-to-one with a coach. Then you would reintroduce some like game-based scenarios, again, just one-to-one with a coach, and then you would jump into team-based scenarios with the players. You get back into training, gradually get back into training, and then you would eventually get back to matches. So I wouldn't jump straight back into matches. Again, this is a gradual process that you need to manage with your coach or whoever you're working with. And so until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less, and function is at the level required for that sport. So again, this completely depends on the sport. For weightlifting, for example, this could be that you need to hit a particular number in the back squat, or you need to hit particular numbers in like a pulling or hinging movement as well. So you've got set criteria there. For CrossFit, this could be that you need to hit, you need to complete a particular capacity or workout test for thrusters, for example, to then measure how aggravated the patella tendon is. So this is really dependent on the sport. But again, same gist here, until pain is regularly 3 out of 10 or less, and you meet the function that is required for that sport. Okay, so just a quick summary. You want to ask yourself a question: where are you now, and where do you want to be? So again, depending on if that tendinopathy is reactive or degenerative, really depends on what stage you can start off with, which stage you can start in. I would always recommend starting with the isometrics and then building up this way. But if the tendinopathy is very acute and it's reactive and you've only been dealing with it for like a week or two, potentially you could start higher up and just, start the lifting phase. But just to be safe, I would always start down here, work through the isometrics, work through that process of the pain scores, the functional deficits, and that pain provocation test, and then work your way up through there to the lifting, the store and release, and then finishing off by returning to your sport. Troubleshooting. So there's a few things I want to mention here about troubleshooting and other issues you might have with patella tendon pain. So number one, is it actually patella tendinopathy? Okay, I can't tell you this because obviously I'm not diagnosing the injury, but yeah, if you're sure it's patella tendon pain, this is obviously the correct way to go about rehabbing it. If it's not patella tendon pain and it doesn't kind of meet those things that I was talking about, and you haven't had it assessed, it could be something else. So just make sure it is patella tendon pain before going through this process. Another thing I would like to mention is just general health markers that can really impact what you're doing with rehab, and especially tendons. You need to make sure that you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night, and you need to make sure you're getting good quality sleep. Reduction of drinking, smoking, your nutrition needs to be good, and you generally want to manage your stress levels as well. All of these things in the research have been shown to affect the health of tendons, especially the sleep, nutrition, and smoking and drinking. That can all impact the tendons significantly. And the other thing I forgot to mention is weight as well. So if you're overweight, if you need to lose some weight, that's obviously a massive factor, because again, the tendon there is taking load that it doesn't need to take. And if that tissue is fat, then it's not functional tissue, if that makes sense. So again, the tendon there is having to take load that it doesn't need to take. So ideally you want to lose some weight, or you want to put on some muscle. Again, this completely depends on the individual, but you will know if you're overweight or not. Okay. So I hope you found that video useful. Any questions, drop them in the comments down below. If you're interested in what we do at FCR with online rehab, just visit the link in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video.